Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and this is my August wrap-up. August was a bit of a weird month. There was classicsathon, which I attempted, I guess technically succeeded, but not really. There was the fact that I have taken the entire month off my PhD work and just focused on my retail job, which makes me feel like I haven't used my brain in a while. But despite all of those things, I managed to read a few very interesting books. Not many, but a few, and I'm going to talk about those in a moment. First though, one of my favourite parts of my wrap-ups, and that is the small booktuber shoutouts. This month, as always, I have 3 wonderful booktubers to shout out that I have particularly enjoyed watching this month. So let's get started with those straight away. The first booktuber I would like to mention is Andrea from Infinite Text. She is a Canada-based booktuber who is a librarian by day, and as such she has a huge knowledge of books. Her special interests include mythology from around the world, classics, topics around libraries and bibliography, as well as everything to do with death and mortality. She reads very wildly, both in fiction and non-fiction genres, and I always come away from her videos with a ton of new titles on my book wish list. The next channel I would like to recommend is Biblio Atlas. This is run by Crystal, and her channel includes some super intelligent content about world literature, classics, old and ancient texts. She has a focus on poetry from around the world and throughout history. She comes up with some really interesting ideas for videos as well, like the one where she just straight up ripped up a James Joyce book, which is weirdly calming to watch, I have to say. Her videos really make you want to broaden your reading horizon, and I always feel like I've learned something after watching one of her videos. The last channel I want to recommend today is Rashmika Reads Books. She is a fairly young booktuber, but she reads a lot of very different books, including some classics and literature from her native country, South Africa. I love her videos because I really enjoy her very dry sense of humour and her no-nonsense approach to books and literature. She has a great talent for those kind of improvised, chatty videos. She's so witty and intelligent in them and is just a joy to watch. All 3 channels will be linked down below and I urge you to go and check them out. Let's get to the book wrap-up part of the video then. So, August was classicsathon, which was a classic-focused readathon hosted by Lucy the Reader. I made a beautiful TBR, then revised that TBR and then didn't stick to it. Sometimes the whole kind of habit of booktubers of making TBRs and then ignoring them reminds me of Emma Woodhouse in Jane Austen's Emma, who is also known for making reading list upon reading list and then not actually reading the books at all. But technically I still fulfilled the requirement of classicsathon, which is to read at least 1 classic, and I did. I actually read 3 classics this month. Those 3 classics were a total of 4 books that I read in August, and the average rating of those was 3.5 stars. The first book I read was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I actually documented the process of reading this book and made a separate video for that, which is going to be linked up here, but beware of spoilers, because all I did was recorded a short reaction after reading every single chapter of the book. So if you're interested in my theories and guesses that I had while reading the book, then you can find that video up there and in the description box. But again, I wouldn't recommend watching that unless you've read the book. Rebecca is a novel from 1938, and it follows the life of a young woman through the beginning of her marriage to a very rich English widower. The heroine falls in love with this man while they're both away in Monte Carlo, but as they return to his ancestral home in Cornwall, things get a bit dark. She notices that he's not quite over the death of his first wife, Rebecca, and she feels that the ghost of Rebecca is lingering in the big country house that she is now living in. There are dark secrets to be uncovered, and the heroine needs to find her own confidence in order to survive in this house, in which she really feels out of place. The reason I read Rebecca in the first place was because so many booktubers whose opinion I value very much really loved it, and I can totally see why. On the surface, this book is a creepy, dark romance/mystery with some wonderfully intriguing characters and some beautifully atmospheric prose. But deeper down, there are some interesting observations about the theme of power and how that power is shaped by class and wealth and gender. The main character feels completely powerless in her new life, as her life is basically controlled by her careless and condescending husband, as well as the creepy housekeeper and the shadow of the dead Rebecca. Anyway, this was a really stunning book, and I can't wait to read more by Daphne du Maurier, although I might leave it until a dark winter's night, because that feels like the appropriate time of year to read these sorts of books. I still enjoyed Rebecca very much. I'm so glad I picked it up, and I'm giving it 4 stars. And I've just realised I've done that entire review without the customary holding up of the book, so here it is. Got it in a charity shop. Next, I tried to read this book, The Crystal Keep by Sheila Gilluly. This was a DNF, but unlike other books that I give up on, I am not giving this my customary 1-star rating. Instead, I'm leaving it unrated. The reason I couldn't get through this is because it's the second book in a series, and it just doesn't work out of context. I didn't give this enough of a chance to really figure out whether I think it is a good book or not, so I am leaving it unrated. Then I listened to 2 audiobooks this month, and they're both part of the complete Sherlock Holmes collection by Arthur Conan Doyle and read by Stephen Fry. I got this on Audible for a single credit, and it is all Sherlock Holmes novels and short stories collections in one. If you want to try out Audible, you know, you get that 3-month trial with pretty much everything that Audible sponsors. I would highly recommend getting that because you're getting so much value for your free credit. So I've been listening through this collection this year, and I've read the books before, but I haven't listened to the audiobook before. So first this month I listened to the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. This is the second short story collection. It's from 1894. Like all the other Sherlock Holmes books, it follows the famous London detective Sherlock Holmes and his friend and biographer Dr. Watson. This was a really wonderful collection of cases that were for the most part very interesting and entertaining, despite sometimes very silly titles like The Adventure of the Cardboard Box. This is the collection in which we encounter 2 of the most famous characters in the world of Sherlock Holmes. There's Sherlock Holmes' brother Mycroft Holmes and also his arch nemesis Professor Moriarty. The book ends with the famous fight at the Reichenbach Falls, in which both Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty fall to their deaths. Spoiler, Sherlock Holmes isn't actually dead though. What made this collection truly wonderful was Stephen Fry's narration. While he might not be the most gifted narrator when it comes to, say, American accents, he gives Watson such an emotional inner voice that you really feel for this guy. He read the very last story in which he talks about Sherlock Holmes' death with such gravitas and sadness in his voice that it actually made me cry a little bit. And I'm convinced that Stephen Fry himself was crying in parts when he was reading it out, because you can really hear the emotion in his voice. I can highly recommend getting the complete Sherlock Holmes on audiobook just to hear Stephen Fry narrate this single story. I gave the Memoirs of Sherlock Holmes 4 stars and then swiftly moved on to listen to the next collection, which was The Return of Sherlock Holmes from 1905. This is the short story collection that includes Sherlock Holmes, well, as the title says, returning from the dead. The stories in this one as a whole are not as good as in the memoirs, but there are some gems in there as well. They tend to be a lot more action-packed in this. There's a lot more travelling around the countries and stalking criminals and wielding guns and revolvers in this than in the previous collection, which tended to focus more on sort of long-distance deductions from Sherlock Holmes' sitting room. This was still fun and entertaining, but I didn't connect to these stories quite as much as in the earlier collections, so I'm giving this one 3 stars. Another thing that makes these audiobooks really wonderful is Stephen Fry's introductions, which he wrote and read out. He has a very long history with the Sherlock Holmes canon, and you can tell just how much he loves these stories by listening to these introductions. The last book I read in August was Witches Abroad by Terry Pratchett. I got this one in the last charity shop haul, and I've mostly been reading it in my lunch break at work. This is part of the Discworld series, and it follows, as the name suggests, the witches on a mission to a foreign land where they have to go and stop a story from happening. The witches are some of my favourite Discworld characters, and this adventure was just delightful. Pratchett takes tropes from fairy tales and from folk stories and just has a lot of fun with it. The dialogue in this is sharp as ever, and the whole adventure is a lot of fun to read. I like that I can read this book in little half-hour-long lunchtime bits and not really miss out on too much, because the story itself, while it has some twists and turns, is not very difficult to keep up with at all. Discworld novels are books that I can enjoy in small doses, but that don't hold my attention for long enough to get through the book quickly. And that's mainly the reason why I'm giving this book 3 stars instead of 4, because really I did enjoy it, and I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in a humorous take on fairy tales. So this was my book wrap-up for August. My non-book favourite this month, by the way, is the single reason why I didn't get as much reading done as I would have liked to. And that is because I've spent almost every evening in August binge-watching the medical drama House. Yep, I'm getting through about 5 episodes a day and I'm not done yet. I realised I'm about a decade too late to the House train, but I don't care. This is entirely my husband's fault, by the way, who one day early in August innocently suggested that I might enjoy the show. Now the house is a mess, the fridge is empty, the cats are getting neglected, but I'm 7 seasons in. I know I'll get back to reading once I'm done with the show, which, according to my calculations, should be at the end of this week. So this was my shout-out, wrap-up and favourites for August. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you very much for watching. Bye!